Okay, I just want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time out to sit down and chat with me. The attentive viewers will recognize you from a video we made quite a while ago, all about treason. But if we start right back at the beginning, regardless, how did you first get into singing and into the industry?
So I started when I was around 14, professionally. There was like an audition going on at the time for a show that was an opera, a pop opera version of the story of Romeo and Juliet,
Hmm.
and the composer was Riccardo Cocciante, which is the same composer of Notre Dame de Paris. I don't know if you've have heard of the show, which was very popular at the time in Italy and in France, and is still like a massive international success. And he wrote another show and he was looking for the cast of the new show, and being so young the characters, they opened the auditions to everyone basically,
Hmm.
and they had open calls. So my mom heard that at the radio, and she knew how much of a fan I was of Riccardo Cocciante and the previous show, and so she brought home like the application form, and I went through with it, and it was just for fun. Like it was just literally to be able to potentially meet the composer and the team, and kind of like fulfill some of my
Hmm.
childhood dreams. But I would never have imagined that a few months later I would be casted as the lead role for that show.
Wow.
And that's how I started. So I was a 14 years old Romeo in a musical adaptation of the
Hmm.
story, Shakespearean story, and that's kind of started everything. And then I would say that growing up, I kind of developed interest in other fields of the entertainment, not only
Hmm.
musical theater or theater in general, but that would be the very very beginning.
Mm. And so, sort of, what was the music industry like? Because obviously, when you were younger, you were obviously living in Italy. What was the music industry like there compared to, say, London or the UK?
So I would say that the main difference is that culturally, musical theater is not something that belongs to Italy. It's not like an Italian
Mm.
cultural phenomenon. It's more uh, English or
Mm.
American, British or American, I would say. So, of course, we knew about musicals, but there were some productions. There were one major company that would produce some of the major titles every now and then, but they would be like, compared to opera, they would be like, how can I say? They would have like a little bit of a less impact on the culture. Um, but I started to become interested in in musical theater by doing it professionally. And so the main difference would be that in Italy there was mostly open calls because there weren't so many productions and there weren't so
Okay.
many performers, especially at the
Mm.
time. We weren't that many, so you don't really have an agent in Italy. You don't really need an agent to go for the major productions as well. They're
Mm.
usually like open calls, and so in terms of like organization, I would say that's the main difference. Um, then in terms of taste, I would say that it's probably more complicated to sell certain shows.
Mm.
So, for example, shows like Phantom of the Opera just opened this year in Italy. It never opened before, even though everywhere else in the world it was a massive success. Les Miserables has never seen, production, a professional production in
Mm.
Italy. So it's very different from what people might expect be the successful shows
Mm.
abroad to compare to what could work in Italy.
Mm.
But I would say that beside that, the preparation as well, it's very intense, especially on a vocal and acting level. There are musical theater schools. I didn't go to a musical theater school. I went to an acting school,
Mm.
but there are schools as well. So I wouldn't say there are many differences, but of course you can tell that in the UK, well, or the US, there surely is more
Mm.
market and more people that want to do that professionally full time.
Mm. And so that show that you did when you were 14, was that in Italian or in English?
Yes, yes, everything would be adapted in Italian.
Okay.
Um, so even major titles like Mamma Mia or Beauty and the Beast, that were productions brought
Mm.
in Italy, they were translated into Italian. So that's also different. Like maybe abroad in some other countries, maybe you might find an English version
Mm.
that resides or world or like a world tour of, I don't know, a major production that goes into certain countries. That also arrives to Italy, but if you want to really get people in, it would need to be in
Mm.
Italian so people can understand fully what's going on.
And then from sort of those shows, then obviously Italian based, then to move into Obviously, now you're residing in London. Did you find a difference between having to switch languages? Did that affect you in any way?
Um, Sometimes,
Hmm.
I would say before moving to the UK, I moved to France. So that
Okay.
was like the first step where I was confronted with a different reality, a different language, the fact that I need to encounter even a different culture. So kind of adapt in that sense and perform as well in a language that wasn't really my own. But because I've always been drawn to musical theatre and international music in general, growing up as well, even before I started to perform. So even when I was even younger than 14, I would listen mainly to American or British
Mm,
singers or performers. So I would be accustomed to experiencing and imagining performance being in English.
mm,
But of course, at the beginning, it was more complicated, especially when you have scripts or when the rhythm and the pace of a song is
mm.
quite upbeat. It might be a little bit complicated to kind of fit in it. I still struggle sometimes with it with my accent, but I also accepted that that's the thing that makes me a little bit
Yeah,
different from everyone
totally.
else. So, but that would be the main difficulty. Otherwise, I always love to perform in English and use
Mm,
English as another language. I actually find it sometimes easier for me to perform in English than in Italian.
mm. And so, talking about performing in English, the interview we mentioned earlier was for Trees in the Musical, which obviously you had a large role in. Do you want to just talk a bit about what Treason was and what the message of the musical was?
So I thought that that was like an incredibly timely as well musical in the sense that the collaboration with Victoria happened during pandemic,
Mm,
and a musical that would raise questions and point out issues regarding the environment and the problems that we are seeing on a daily basis in the news and everywhere else. I mean, it's December and there are 10 degrees, so surely something's not
mm.
completely right
Yeah,
here.
totally.
So, so I feel that it was a very smart way, and I feel that was the power of treason is that it it brings you to think about it without
Mm,
feeling paternalistic or accusatory.
mhm,
It brings up the issue without making you feel bad about, like, not bad about it, but bad about yourself. But it does pushes you to question your choices.
mm,
And I thought as well the musically was incredibly well done. I'd
mm,
love to collaborate on that, and I really can't wait to see it performing,
mm.
happening live somewhere, maybe hopefully soon.
Was that your first like totally original musical that hadn't been staged before?
Yes and no. If like Romeo and Juliet, for example, was an adaptation of a
Okay.
story that existed, but that, for example, was a new production. So I was involved in a completely new production. Um, in that sense, in terms of musical theatre, yes, potentially after that, I would say that
Yeah.
was but that was a new production, completely new one in
Mm.
especially in English.
And what was it like taking on a show with a brand new character then? Because you've got nothing to base it on, no inspiration. This is all your creativity and your own innovation. So what was
I
that
loved
like?
it. I loved it. I loved the fact that I had, of course, guidelines
Hmm.
from
Totally.
Victoria and ideas of the character, but I was very free to make Ash and the character sound however I wanted because I was the first one to bring those words. I was given the chance to be the first one to bring those words and those notes to life with a
Mm.
recording. And so it felt very daunting in a sense because I was like, this is going to be, for a while at least, the reference for many other people if they go into workshops or
Mm.
production or whatever. So I was very conscious of trying to be, you know, at, to deliver the best performance
Mm.
that I could because I wanted Victoria and the show to have something that would reflect the importance and the quality of everything else that
Mm.
was done around it. So, but at the same time, it was very freeing because I didn't have any major superstar that have done the shows before
Mm.
or incredibly talented performers that have done it before. So it felt daunting in a sense, but also less daunting to try to approach a lead role
Mm.
that wasn't really ever done before.
Ah. And so obviously we've talked about musical theatre then, but you've transitioned into songwriting. So how did that change come about?
I think that came about in the same period, and I think also that working on a completely new show reminded me of the freedom that sometimes working on original content brings your creativity to. I love performing in any shape or form. So whether
Hmm.
it's musical theatre, revivals, or new compositions, or acting something that has been done before, even in theatre, or new productions, or screen, or whatever. But I do find that my personal artistic self find its best when I have that freedom of create from scratch.
Mm.
And I found that songwriting, that if again, that was a kind of like, how can I say, try, it was a way to fill up some times that we had at the time
Hmm.
with one of my closest friends. She's also a British singer songwriter. She's called Lucy War, and she's an incredibly talented indie pop, electronic pop singer. And I asked her, "Can you help me to write my first single?" And we did, and it was in a form of a duet. And I found the whole process that I've never done before so freeing and so, yeah, fulfilling,
Hmm.
freeing, and also stimulating, that I said, like, I really want to do more of this. And so I started to write more and experiment more. So even some stuff that I never released, that was
Mm.
mostly for practice. But um, yes, I found that that was an incredibly good way for me to communicate with the
Mm.
world and use my art to communicate also what I felt that was important for me.
Obviously, you've got a new single out, "Call Me Down." So, where did that come from? What was the inspiration for that piece?
So it was summer,
Hmm.
and it was very hot, and there was a new movie that came out last summer that was Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Hmm.
Uh, and me and my best friend Flavio, which is the other composer of the song, we were discussing. I was in Rome at the time at his place, and we were discussing about relationships, or past relationships and experiences with love. Um, kind of like delved into, I would say, more philosophical. We entertained ourselves talking about like love and relationships and what went wrong and what went well, what we were missing, what we didn't miss, and whatever. And then we saw separately, not together, the video, the film, the movie, and then we realized that the movie also touched upon, especially a certain dynamic that we were discussing about, which is sometimes the dynamic of avoidant and extremely anxiously attached to a relationship,
Hmm.
which wasn't really the main deal of this of the movie. There was something else at the core of it, but this idea of sometimes two people struggling to create a reality together because one of the two sometimes is less available, or it is stuck in a situation, like for
Hmm.
example Harry in the story, where if they feel they cannot really fulfill what they want, in that story specifically was an issue of class and political representation, and not being able to step into uh, certain kind of light or identity, or accept a certain identity of self publicly because of um, the social reasons
Hmm.
that surrounded the characters. But sometimes that can be as well like an emotional availability that might come from previous relationships, previous trauma, that has nothing to do with love itself. And so I also realized how I was in different times of my life, or even in the same relationship, sometimes in both shoes. So I was sometimes wearing the I was sometimes wearing the role of the avoidant and
Hmm.
sometimes the role of the anxiously attached in the same relationship or in different times of my life, and I would blame whoever wasn't on my end of the game
Hmm.
if I was the right and they were the wrong. And that kind of like was a good way to kind of look back even at past relationships and experiences and say, actually, we both had our reasoning. It's
Hmm.
just that we couldn't meet in the middle. And so we created this song that was mostly to let's say talk about, give place to both point of views, so the avoidant and the anxiously attached, um, to exist and
Hmm.
give them a realistic and a proper existence, and they have the right to exist both in their own form
Hmm.
and trauma and experiences. And in the chorus mainly, then what we wanted to do is to find a way that these two people that struggle, they could just see what's actually good and draw them together and trust that sometimes,
Hmm.
rather than maybe overthink it too much, or start to think about so many conditions or situations around them that prevent them from being together, to
Hmm.
kind of find like a good way to go forward. So the musical environment, it feels quite sad and dramatic, but also the content of the song wanted to be still hopeful. It's not like a
Mm,
breakup song, it's not like a heartbroken song, but there is an element of struggle, but eventually, hopefully, of redemption and ability to connect
mm,
with love through passion. So we use the idea of like passion being sometimes one of the main indicator if two people kind of like can be together, if there's
mm,
like a big element of that, why sometimes resisted, why not trying to follow that element, with a good reasoning still, but
mm,
without having reason to take over something that is so potent and powerful, like love and attraction and
mm.
connection and chemistry.
So obviously you had this idea then. What was the process of of building it up and putting it together? You had the idea and then where did it go from there?
Yeah. Well, we started to write down some lyrics, and
Mm,
Flavio came up with the beginning of the song with the melody of that, and then we kind of developed from there. It was a very much a work in progress. Luckily, I was in Rome at the time, so I could go at his
mm,
place. We would play maybe for like the full afternoon and try to workshop lyrics, and even taking inspiration from the dialogues that the two characters used in the movie. There are some little references
mm,
and cameos here and there of some of the lines that we found very very simple but very powerful that
mm,
the characters used. um and yeah, it kind of it was a work in progress and a flow, so
mm,
it didn't really take long before we had the main structure. It took almost like roughly a day, and then we kind of refined the song in the months to come.
mm,
And So yeah, and we posted immediately after the first day of writing it a little snippet on social media, and people actually reacted quite positively,
mm,
especially for being like a new song that wasn't attached to a famous person. And so I was like, I think we are on the right path.
mm,
We really need to work on it and release it. And so that's why we started to work on it. And then when it was about to create a music and sound environment, I wanted to create something that was very cinematic and dramatic
mm,
and orchestral as well. So there are elements of very simple. There are very simple moments of piano and voice where
mm,
everything feels kind of stripped back and simple, which are the two verses where you deliver the complexity of the
mm,
relationship. But then in the chorus, where the kind of idea of passion and connection and love comes in, then we wanted something that was very majestic and big and overwhelming in a sense musically.
mm,
So we went for a full orchestration, bigger vocals, and some choirs as well to and backing vocals to keep the tension up. Um, in terms of inspiration, with my music producer, we kind of looked into what Adele and Sam Smith and Billie Eilish did for James Bond. So then
mm,
we wanted that kind of musical environment where you would hear a very big orchestra playing, but at the same time, the vocals would be still quite contemporary.
mm,
So without
mm.
falling too much into the classical side
Yeah.
of my background.
And you talked about feedback when you first released it. What's the feedback since you've released it to Spotify and other music streaming platforms?
I always love when I see people connecting randomly with my music. I have a few very dedicated fans that are always on spot. They always share. They always show their love. But usually also they are the ones that know about the song already. They know a lot about it. They've heard
Mm,
me speaking about it in many different occasions. Um, so I'm always even more surprised when someone that doesn't really know who I am and finds the music and they find that they can connect with it.
mhm,
So the response was always quite um, overwhelming, positively in a sense that it feels that people understand that oh yes, I've been here, but I also have been there, and
yeah.
they can find both themselves and their partner or the ex-partner in the song, which is eventually what I really want is that people really can picture themselves into the story, or they can find relation
Mm,
to the story, so that it kind of applies to their own life. And I love the fact that people feel that the music, the sonic environment as well, beside the lyrics, brings them into this very emotional state, which is
mm,
something that I always try to lean into potentially for my theatrical and acting background. But I really like to use music and stories to really enhance and bring turn up the heat of emotions in people that listen.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, fabulous. So we are coming to the end of my questions, but I've got a few more. So, what advice would you have for young people looking to get into the industry or looking into creating music or into musical theatre?
Well, starting from musical theatre, I would say, I mean, if you live in the UK, you have some amazing, incredibly helpful schools and training training institutions. So
Mm-hmm.
I always suggest to train because eventually, when you start to then perform fully and full time, you need to have those skills and tools that really allow you not only to be able to deliver correctly and in the best way possible what you can give, but also to preserve yourself for a long run
Mm-hmm.
so that you don't ruin your body or your vocal cords, or you don't fail into like um, you know some situations in which your body might resent you for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that giving receive a structure as well and a discipline into this kind of realm and business is very important because it's a very high demanding business. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't look like it, and I know that most people think that it's quite easy because it looks like we're having fun, and most of us hopefully have fun when
Yeah.
we perform, but it's still like a very high demanding job. It's almost like athletes that go
Mm.
to compete at the Olympics, or like footballers at a very high level. Like you need to be able to have a structure in your life as well, and not only in the job. And I think that um, schools can do that for you,
Mm.
can really help you to build that. For young artists, I mean, I'm not. What I can say is that what I've tried myself was always to at the beginning I always tried to kind of see what was working in the market and
Mm.
get close to that as soon as I could. And I realized that that actually was the first way to kind of kill your own uniqueness.
Mm.
So I know that if you want to write music, you want your music to resonate, not falsely maybe to become famous, but that idea of having that amount of resonance
Mm-hmm.
sometimes makes you go, oh yes, and maybe I should write something that is more appealing for
Mm.
the industry and for the audience. So what's working right now? Let's copy that, or let's stay close to that. But I also realized that people sometimes create trends, and people sometimes create what's actually trending, and the sound and music and popular music especially always develops and evolves depending
Mm.
on the people that actually release it. And so I always suggest now to people that ask me, even though I'm quite new
Mm.
myself to this world, to kind of just be yourself and talk about what matters to you, and make sure that what you write and what you release is something that makes you want to sing it and makes you passionate about it. There is
Mm.
no way of creating. There is no reason why we should create music, put it out there in the hope to have recognition or connect with people. If then once we connect with people, that music that we release doesn't really connect with us in the first place.
Mm.
So uh, yeah, this would be the only advice. Just be yourself, and it sounds very simple and already done and said and done. But if you trust yourself, you trust your guts, you trust your taste, and you surround yourself with people as well that can really help you to achieve that as well. Whether it's like music producers or collaborations with other songwriters, can really give you an idea on by experimenting what's your sound, what you
Mm.
really are passionate about, and what kind of world you want to create musically for people to join you in.
Oh, fabulous. So what's next for you? Where can we expect to see you? What have you got planned? It's time to plug all those things you've got coming up.
So, actually, quite soon now, it's on the 27th of February. I'm performing at the Pheasantry in London with a show that is called The Songs of Scott Allen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the performers that is going to perform there. I'm going to sing a couple of songs that are two of my favorite songs by Scott Allen. So I'm quite excited about it, especially because I always love to perform live,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, and so that would be an incredibly good way to perform some of my favorite music being myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the first appointment live. And then I'm going to be in Berlin this summer playing Oh What a Night, which is a show inspired by Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons, where I'm going to play Frankie Valli for about 6 weeks. So from the 25th of July, I'm going to be in Berlin playing this show until
Oh,
the 6th of September, if I'm not mistaken. And then after that, yes, I have this release that just came out, but I have about other few. I'm not gonna
yeah,
say numbers
totally.
because I know I think I can commit to those numbers, but I have more songs coming out. So yeah, if you want to check out my last single, it's called Cool Me Down and it's on Spotify. And then after this, is gonna be more. So if you want to follow me on social medias or on Spotify, so you can always have the updates whenever new
Mm.
music is released.
I will put the links in the comments so people can just scroll down and click away.
Amazing.
But I will end the same way I started, just by saying thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with me. Obviously, I can't wait to see how successful the song's going to be, and all those fabulous things you've got planned. So thank you so much, and I shall speak
Great.
to you
Thank
soon.
you.